session, the Honorable Judge Wilhelmina Heath presiding.
You may be seated.
They got color good.
The people of the state of Mississippi versus Karen Andre.
Ready, Your Honor. Ready, Your Honor.
The clerk will draw a jury.
You are the panel from which a jury will be selected. 12 will be drawn. As I call your name, answer present, step forward and take your seats and await instructions from Judge Heath. Jerry McInerney. Don Gelfinger. Jesse Brent.
Take the back row, sir. There's 6 seats here. Thank you.
John Smith.
One more.
Martha Nunnery. John Suarez.
Back row, sir.
Jim Maxwell. A true verdict, so help you God. Please be seated.
Ladies and gentlemen, you are the jurors who will try this case. At its close, you will retire to the jury room and vote upon your verdict. I instruct you to listen carefully to the evidence and to make your judgment to the best knowledge of your hearts and minds. You are to determine whether the defendant, Karen Andre, is guilty or not guilty of the murder of Bjorn Faulkner. Her fate rests in your hands. The district attorney may now proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, on the night of January the 16th, the body of a man came hurtling through space and crashed, a disfigured mass at the foot of the Faulkner building. He was thrown, or jumped, from the balcony of his luxurious penthouse. The defense will claim that it was suicide, that this great man was unwilling to bend before his creditors and acknowledge his ruin, that he found the fall from the top of the tallest building in Jackson shorter and easier than the descent from the throne of the world's financial dictator. Just a year ago, behind every large financial transaction in the world stood this great figure of a man, with kingdoms and nations in one hand and a whip in the other. Why should he commit suicide? No one suspected that a gigantic swindle lay at the foundation of the Faulkner enterprises. No one suspected that the entire business world was in danger of a heart attack. But a few days after his death, the earth shook from the crash of his business. Thousands of investors were stricken with paralysis when that monstrous heart stopped beating. 2 women ruled his life and his death. Here is one of them, Karen Andre, Faulkner's efficient secretary and notorious fellow swindler. But there was another, one whom fate had given him for his salvation. This is the lovely girl who is now his widow, Nancy Lee Faulkner, only daughter of John Graham Whitfield, our great philanthropist. Faulkner thought he had found new innocence in the life of his young bride. He was going to start all over. And the best proof of that is that 2 weeks after his wedding, he dismissed his secretary, Karen Andre. But ladies and gentlemen, one is not easily through with a woman like Karen Andre. We can only guess what hatred and revenge smoldered in her heart. No, ladies and gentlemen, Bjorn Faulkner did not commit suicide. He was murdered. And the state contends that he was murdered by the woman you see before you, Karen Andre, that on the night of January the 16th, she took her revenge. That, ladies and gentlemen, is what we are about to prove. Our first witness will be Dr. Kirkland.
Dr. Kirkland. Do you solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Please be seated.
Kindly state your name.
Teresa Kirkland,
What is your occupation?
medical examiner for Hinds County.
In the course of your duty, what were you called upon to do on the night of January the 16th?
I was called to examine the body of Bjorn Faulkner.
You found a body greatly mangled by a fall.
Yes.
Was that all?
No. Upon further examination, I discovered a bullet wound between the fourth and fifth interspace in the region of the heart.
And what did you establish as the cause of death?
It was impossible to determine. It could have been the wound or the fall.
In your opinion, Dr. Kirkland, could a .32 caliber bullet have caused that wound?
Yes.
How long had Faulkner been dead when you examined the body?
I reached the body about half an hour after the fall.
Judging by the condition of the body, could you tell exactly how long it had been dead?
No, due to the cold weather, the blood had coagulated immediately, which makes a difference of several hours impossible to determine.
Therefore, it is possible that Faulkner had been dead longer than a half an hour.
Yes, that's possible.
He therefore could have been dead before he was thrown from the penthouse.
Yes.
Thank you, Dr. Kirkland. That's all.
Dr. Kirkland, you said that Mr. Faulkner could have been shot and died before he fell from the penthouse. But can you state positively that he died as a result of that bullet wound?
No, due to the condition of the body, it was impossible to determine.
Is it possible that Mr. Faulkner was conscious and able to move after he was wounded?
Yes, that's possible.
So he could have shot himself and then jumped from the building?
Yes, but
That's
it's
all.
not.
Can you read your record, Mr. Flint?
No, Your Honor.
You may step down, Doctor.
Do you solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes, my love.
Please be seated.
Mrs. Hutchins, would you deposit your gun with the bailiff, please?
Can I have that?
No, you may not.
What is your name?
Mrs. John Joseph Hutchins.
And your occupation?
Oh, I ain't got no occupation. I'm just the wife of my husband.
And what does your husband do?
Well, he's the night janitor in the Faulkner building.
Did Mr. Faulkner have business offices in that building?
Yes, sir.
And did he have the penthouse on the roof of that building?
Yes, sir.
And who lived there?
Well, now, Mr. Faulkner did. That is, before he got married.
And after his marriage?
Oh, after he got married, Miss Andre there, she lived there, all by herself.
Have you ever seen Mr. Faulkner calling on Miss Andre after his marriage?
Yes, sir, one time,
And that was?
the night of January 16th.
Well, tell us about it, Miss Hutchins.
Oh, sure. Well, it was about 10:30 at night. I think, yeah, it was 10:30.
How did you know the time?
Well, see, my husband, he goes to work every night at 10 o'clock, but on that night, I take his place.
Well, why didn't your husband work that night?
Well, it seems for the last year or two, my husband, he ain't got no more gumption. And when he don't, I take his place.
I see. So on the night of January the 16th, your husband was low on gumption.
That's right. Anyway, I'd been working about 30 minutes when the doorbell at the private entrance room, well, I went there and opened it. It's Miss Andre, and Mr. Faulkner was with her. I'm surprised, though, because Miss Andre, she has her own key, and most times she opens the door herself.
Was she alone with Mr.
Oh,
Faulkner?
no, so there was two gentlemen with her.
And who were they?
Oh, now, I don't know.
Have you ever seen them before?
No, sir, never.
What did they look like?
Oh, they was kind of tall and slender, both of them. Except that this one had his hat pulled down over his face and his coat collar was turned up. He'd have been a drinking.
Well, now, how do you know that?
Well, 'cause Mr. Faulkner and this other gentleman, they had to help him into the elevator. His feet was kind of loose.
Did Mr. Faulkner look worried?
Oh, no, sir, he was powerful happy.
Did he look like a man contemplating self-destruction?
Now,
I mean, did he look as if he was going to kill himself?
no, sir, unless he planned on dying of laughing.
Objection, Your Honor.
Objection sustained.
Now, what I'm gone and done.
Oh, nothing at all. Just answer the question. Did the others in the party seem happy, too?
Well, yes, sir, they was all laughing when they got on the elevator, except in the drunk one.
Did you see any of them leave that night?
Uh-huh, the first one left about 15 minutes late.
And who was that?
Oh, it was the drunk one. He come down in the elevator all by himself. Except he didn't seem so drunk no more. He could walk a little, but he staggered. Oh, yeah, and he kept his hat pulled down over his face. Now, I was going to help him to the elevator, seeing the condition he was in. But when he saw me,
Did you see the other guest of Miss Andre leaving too?
Oh, yes, sir. He left about 10 minutes later.
And what did he do?
Well, nothing much. He seemed to be in a hurry, so he went right out.
Now that left Mr. Faulkner and Miss Andre alone in the penthouse that night?
Uh-huh.
Then what?
Well, I went on about my work. Must have been about an hour. Well, I heard screams outside in the street. Miss Andre come running down out of the elevator. Her dress was all torn. She was sobbing wild-like. Well, I run after her. We pushed through the crowds, and there's Mr. Faulkner lying on the sidewalk. He's all mashed to pieces.
And what did Miss Andre do?
Well, she fell down on her knees and screamed.
That's all, Miss Hutchins.
No, that ain't all. There's more.
More?
See,
More
just
what?
then, yes, just then, the local people come running up that policeman and try to tell him something.
And what did they say?
Well, I don't know.
You don't know.
Well, no, sir.
What else?
Well, he took them all up to the penthouse.
Did you go with them to the penthouse?
Well, no, sir.
Well, then you really don't know anymore, do you?
Well, I was going to follow them, but they shut the door. But now that you mention it, now that I think of it, I suspect I don't know.
That's all, Miss Hutchins.
Just a moment. You said that you had never seen Mr. Faulkner calling on Miss Andre after his marriage, with the exception of that one evening. Now, could you tell me, do you always see every visitor who comes into the building at night?
Well, no. If a visitor has his own key, he could come and go, and I wouldn't see him.
In other words, Mr. Faulkner could have been calling upon Miss Andre any number of times, and you wouldn't have seen him come in?
No, sir. I don't spy on people. What they know is I just leave it at that.
That's all.
You may step down now, Mrs. Hutchins.
Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am. Whatever. Can I have my gun?
No, you may not, Mrs. Hutchins. Mrs. Hutchins,
Just as soon as I get my gun.
Mr. Van Fleet, will you help her with her gum? I don't know. Absolutely.
Do you solemnly,
Please finish the oath.
do you solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Please be seated.
Thank you, Mr. Van Fleet.
Your name?
Homer Herbert Van Fleet,
Occupation?
private investigator.
What was your last assignment?
Shadowing Mr. Bjorn Faulkner
By whom were you hired to do it?
by Mrs. Bjorn Faulkner.
Were you shadowing Mr. Faulkner on the night of January the 16th?
I was.
Tell us about it, please.
6:13 p.m. Mr. Faulkner leaves home. He's wearing a formal dress suit. He's driving a Mercedes himself. He's alone. Unusual speed all the way to town.
Where does Mr. Faulkner go?
He drives up to the Faulkner building. Goes in. I wait outside in my car. 9:35 p.m. Mr. Faulkner comes out, and he's with Miss Andre over there. Miss Andre is wearing an orchid corsage of very unusual proportions.
Now, where do they go?
No one's perfect in this world.
What do you mean?
I lost them.
What?
Due to Mr. Faulkner's speed and an accident,
What accident?
my left fender crashing into a truck, damages to which fender charged to Mrs. Faulkner.
What did you do when you lost track of them?
I returned to the Faulkner building and waited.
And when did they return?
I have that here. Yes, at 10:30 p.m. exactly. A gray Plymouth follows them. Mr. Faulkner gets out and helps Miss Andre, and while she rings the bell, Mr. Faulkner opens the door of the other car. That's the Plymouth, okay? A handsome gentleman, he's wearing formal clothes, steps out, and together they help out a third gentleman. This third gentleman is wearing a gray overcoat and shows very definite signs of inebriation.
And then what did you do?
Left my car and went to Gary's Grill. I must explain that I always allow myself time to take nourishment every 4 hours while I'm on duty. So I went to Gary's Grill and watched the front door of the Faulkner building. Yes.
And what did you observe?
Well, nothing. minutes. Yes, then the man in the gray suit, that's the tipsy one, he comes out and starts the car, the Plymouth, and drives away south, very obviously in a hurry.
Did you see the other stranger leave?
The handsome one? Well, yes. 10 minutes later, he gets into a car which stands there at the curb and drives away south.
Have you ever seen Mr. Faulkner with these two gentlemen before?
No, first time I ever saw them.
Now, what did you do when they left?
Well, I waited there. Mr. Faulkner is now alone in the penthouse with Miss Andre. Well, I'm curious, professionally. So I go up to the roof of the Brooks building. That's adjacent to the Faulkner building. There is a club up there and a dining room just off the gallery, and you go out there and you can see the Faulkner penthouse as clear as day. So I go out there and wait.
Then what?
I look.
Then what?
I yell.
What did you see?
No lights. Miss Andre's white gown shimmering in the moonlight. A man in evening clothes, Mr. Faulkner, leaning against a rail outside. I see her go up to him and push with all her might, and he goes over the rail and down.
And then what did you do?
Well, I yell about what I'd seen. A crowd follows me down to the foot of the Faulkner building, and we observe the bloody mess on the pavement, and of course there's Miss Andre sobbing over it, fit to kill.
Your witness.
Mr. Van Fleet, when did you start in the employ of Mrs. Faulkner?
October 13th, 1986.
And do you happen to know what date Mr. and Mrs. Faulkner got married?
I believe it was October 12th, the day before.
Just the day before. In other words, Mrs. Faulkner hired you to spy upon her husband the day after they got married.
So it would seem.
Could you tell me what Mrs. Faulkner's instructions to you when you were hired were?
To watch every action of Mr. Faulkner and report in detail.
Had Mr. Faulkner been calling upon Miss Andre?
I don't know. I don't know what is customary in these circumstances. He went to the Faulkner building every day. She lived in the penthouse. He may have gone up to the penthouse, he may have gone to his office, or she may have come down to his office. I don't know what is customary in these circumstances.
And did you report that to Mrs. Faulkner?
I did.
Did she seem worried?
Well, not particularly, no. Mr. Faulkner was the most devoted of husbands, and he loved his wife dearly.
And just how do you know that?
Well, those are Mrs. Faulkner's own words.
Mr. Van Fleet, could you tell me what time it was you started up to the nightclub atop of the Brooks building on the night of January 16th?
11:32, exactly.
And about how long of a walk is it from the Brooks building to the Faulkner building, or from the Faulkner building to the Brooks building?
About 3 minutes.
Could you tell me what time it was you came out on the balcony of the club that evening? What, Mr. Van Fleet?
11:57.
So it took you exactly 25 minutes to get to the balcony. What were you doing the rest of the time?
Well, they have dancing at the club and other things, and
And did you partake of these other things, Mr. Van Fleet?
well, I had a couple of drinks, if I catch the drift of your curiosity, but you can't say I was intoxicated.
I've said nothing of the kind. As yet. Now, on the night of January 16th, it was in the darkness that you say that you saw Miss Andre pushing Mr. Faulkner off the building. And it was a little bit of distance away, and you had been, well, shall we just say you had had a couple of drinks?
The drinks had nothing to do with it.
Are you quite certain that she was pushing him? Isn't it possible, Mr. Van Fleet, that she was struggling with him?
Well, it was a funny way of struggling.
What were Mrs. Faulkner's instructions to you before you came here to testify tonight?
Mrs. Faulkner has not been here to instruct me, as everyone knows. Mrs. Faulkner left town shortly after the unfortunate incident and has not been heard from or seen since.
But have you heard from them since?
I have no record of it.
Mr. Van Fleet, would you mind telling me how much an eyewitness to Mr. Faulkner's murder would be worth to Mrs. Faulkner?
We object, Your Honor.
Objection sustained.
That's all, Mr. Van Fleet.
Mr. Stevens.
Yes, sir. Mr. Van Fleet, would you tell me what type of car you drive, sir?
A brown Ford. It's old but serviceable.
Did you notice any other car following the man in the gray coat that evening?
I have no record of it.
That's all, thank you.
Any redirect, Mr. Flint?
No, Your Honor.
You may step down.
Elmer Sweet.
Do you solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Please be seated.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Your name?
Elmer Sweeney,
Occupation?
policeman. I've been in service just here. You know, during that time,
On the night of January the 16th, were you at the scene of Bjorn Faulkner's death?
yes, sir, it hardly happened. All of a sudden,
Well, did you question Miss Andre?
Please answer, Mr. Swain.
not right away, before I could do anything, that feller Van Fleet, he rushed up and yelled how he seen Miss Andre push Mr. Faulkner off the roof.
And, how did Miss Andre react to that?
You know, she started laughing. I thought she done gone crazy or something. She really did.
What did you do?
Well, I took her up in the elevator, you know, to examine the penthouse.
Did you find anything unusual?
Yes, sir. You know, we stepped out of the elevator. You know, I thought we was in the country. I really did. There was grass and trees, real trees, one about this big around, and a sandy beach just like the Lux in Mississippi.
What was the first thing that you did?
I turned the shower on.
You did what?
I turned the shower on.
Why on earth did you do that?
Well, I heard that Mr. Faulkner, you know, when he used to live there, he used to bathe in wine. I wanted to find out if it's true.
Well, was it true?
Well, if it was, the service had been disconnected.
Did you find anything at all connected with Faulkner's death?
Oh, that, yes, sir. It was a letter. I saw it in the dining room. I saw it the moment I went in.
Where was it?
It was propped up on the dining room table.
Mr. Flint.
Mrs. Faulkner, Your Honor, if you please, I've been trying to locate this witness.
Very well.
We've looked everywhere for you, Mrs. Faulkner.
I went to California for a quiet blitz. I read in the paper she wanted to call me as a witness, so I hurried back. Daddy flew me here in a plane. I wanted to do my duty for the memory of my husband.
If there's anything we can do to help you, Mr. Flint, we're at your disposal.
I can only express my deepest appreciation, Mr. Whitfield. If you'll kindly take seats, I'll be ready for you. No, please. Come sit in here.
We object, Your Honor. This is an attempt to influence the jury, a trick to make them face Mr. Faulkner's widow throughout the trial.
Your Honor, counsel has no right to dictate where I seat my witnesses.
Objection overruled, Mr. Stevens.
Now, a moment ago, Officer Sweeney, you said you found the letter.
Yes, sir. It's propped up on the dining room table.
I will now show you what has been previously marked by stipulation as State's Exhibit A. Counsel. Is this the letter you found?
You hold this for me. Just a second. Yes, sir. How'd you get it?
Please, read it to the jury.
Please.
If any future historian wants to record my last advice to humanity, I'll say that I found only two valuable things on this earth: my whip over the world and Karen Andre. To those who can use it, the advice is worth what it has cost mankind. Bjorn Faulkner.
Your Honor, this has already been submitted in evidence.
Accepted, Exhibit A.
Now, was that all you found?
No, sir. Out in the garden, I found a gun. You know, it's about this long, but
I
this
will
it
now
was
show
one of
you
them
a
6 shooters.
32 caliber pistol. Is this the weapon you found?
Yes, sir. You got this one too, huh? found out garden under a chair. You know, I picked it up with my handkerchief. I'm always careful about fingerprints. And the barrel, it smelled strong of gunpowder, so I knew it just been shot. I did.
Did you ask Miss Andre whose gun it was?
Yes, sir. She said it was hers.
How did she explain that shot?
Well, she said Mr. Faulkner had been unhappy, and what he'd done, he wrote this letter and put it on that dining room table. Then he went to this drawer and he took out this gun, and she saw what he was going to do with it, and she struggled with him, and the struggle, the gun went off, and he was wounded right there in the chest.
Miss Andre told you that gun was in Faulkner's hand when it went off?
Yes, sir.
She was positive about it.
Well, she said it 3 times.
Was the gun examined for fingerprints?
Yes, sir, headquarters. Oh, excuse me, I need that back. Thank you. Here are the photographs.
Were you able to identify them?
Yes, sir, just like these.
And whose are these?
Miss Andre's.
Your Honor?
Accepted. Exhibit C and D.
Counselor? Did that gun show any fingerprints other than Karen Andre?
Not a one.
Now, after that gun went off in Faulkner's hand, what happened next, according to Miss Andre?
Well, Miss Andre said that she yelled, and before she could do anything, he done jumped off the roof. No, she said it.
Did you ask her who had been with him that night?
Yes, sir, I did. She said that she'd gone out to eat with Mr. Faulkner that night, and that he had 2 friends with him, and she'd never seen them before in her life.
Miss Andre told you that she had never seen these 2 men before.
Yes, sir.
Was she very emphatic about that?
Yes, sir, we couldn't shake her at all.
That's all.
Oh, my God.
Officer, can you speak tonight? Officer Sweeney, Miss Andre told you that she had struggled with Mr. Faulkner in order to prevent his suicide. Could you tell me if you noticed any evidence of a struggle in her clothing that night?
Oh, yes, sir. You know, she had one of those dresses on that, you know, like this, and had them diamond straps on it. And this one was torn off, so she had to hold up just like this. I was so embarrassed.
Thank you, officer.
Any redirect, Mr. Flint?
No, thank you, Your Honor.
You may step down, officer.
I swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
I do.
Please be seated.
Your name?
Jane Chandler.
Occupation?
I'm the handwriting expert for the Jackson Police Department.
Exhibit A, please. Counselor? Do you recognize this letter?
Yes, it's the letter found in Mr. Faulkner's penthouse on the night of his death. I was called on to examine it.
And what were you asked to determine?
I was asked to determine whether or not it was written by Mr. Faulkner.
And what is your verdict?
Certain oddities in his handwriting lead me to believe that this letter was forged.
Thank you. Your witness?
Miss Chandler, it was called to your attention at the inquest that Miss Andre was in the habit of signing Mr. Faulkner's name to certain unimportant documents. Could you tell me if you've had the opportunity to compare Miss Andre's invitation with Mr. Faulkner's real signature?
I have.
And what is your opinion of them?
I'd like to compliment Miss Andre on her artwork. It really was very close.
Bearing that in mind, isn't it actually impossible to tell the difference between her invitation and Mr. Faulkner's signature?
Well, it is very difficult, but we do have ways to determine it.
And what are those means?
One is a microscope. It reveals certain shadowing, certain vibrations of the pen owing to the nerve condition of the writer, which cannot be duplicated.
And how often are you handwriting experts wrong in your opinion?
I object, Your Honor.
If, Your Honor, please, this is a perfectly legitimate question. I wish to establish that this is not an exact science.
Your Honor, this has been accepted as an exact science by all courts for a number of years.
Mr.
And if
Flint,
counsel doesn't know that...
Mr. Flint, I will sustain the objection.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Continue, Mr. James.
Miss Chandler, in view of the similarity of the 2 signatures, isn't there a reasonable doubt that this letter is a forgery?
Well, of course,
That's all, thank you.
Any redirect, Mr. Flint?
No, Your Honor.
You may step down, Ms. Chandler.
Thank you.
The truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God. Please be seated.
What is your name?
Nancy Lee Whitfield Faulkner.
And what was your relation to the late Bjorn Faulkner?
I was his wife.
When did you first meet Mr. Faulkner?
In August '85,
And where did you meet him?
at a ball given by a friend of mine in Jackson.
Now, you have heard it stated, and you have heard of his reputation, Mr. Faulkner's that is, his reputation as the most ruthless of men. Did you find him so on your first meeting?
Not at all. He was very charming and considerate the first night I met him. You see, he told me later I was the first woman he'd ever met whom he could respect.
When did you see Mr. Faulkner again?
About 3 weeks later, I invited him to dine at my home on the reservoir. Just an informal little dinner with Daddy present.
Did you see him often after that?
Yes, quite often. His visits became more and more frequent until the day
Until the day.
he proposed to me.
Please continue.
Bjorn and I went riding alone. We stopped on a lonely little road. I'm sorry, it's hard for me to think of those days. Bjorn took my hand in his and looked straight at me and said, "I love you, Nancy."
I'm sorry, Mrs. Faulkner. If you wish to be excused now,
This is
continue
a
tomorrow.
subterfuge, Your Honor, staged to gain the sympathy of the jury.
I object to that remark, Your
I
Honor.
demand a fair trial for my client, Counselor.
Demand what you like, but don't interfere with my witnesses, if you please.
Gentlemen, please. The jury will ignore these remarks.
Now, how can they ignore it? They already heard it.
I am sorry, Mrs. Faulkner, for all of these interruptions. Please proceed.
Then Bjorn told me the truth about his fortunes. He said they were gone. He wanted to ask me to marry him, but he had nothing to offer me. But I loved him, and the money meant nothing to me.
Did Mr. Faulkner feel hopeless about the future?
No, not at all. I told him it was our duty to save his enterprises, our duty to the widows and children who had entrusted their savings to him. He said that my faith in him was like a great driving force. How could he think of suicide?
Did you remain in Jackson after your wedding?
Yes, we made our home on the reservoir. Bjorn gave up his penthouse in Jackson.
Did Mr. Faulkner tell you anything about Miss Andre?
Not at first, but several weeks after we were married, he came to me and said, "Nancy, I feel I must tell you the truth about the secretary who has served me for so long." I said that he didn't have to, but he said that he must, that our marriage had become a sacred trust and the past could have no part in it. Karen Andre was the cause and symbol of his darkest years, and he must dismiss her.
And what did you answer?
I said, we must not be cruel. Perhaps he could find another position for Miss Andre. He said he would provide for her financially, but he never wanted to see her again.
Tell me, what did Mr. Faulkner do on the day of January the 16th?
He spent it in town on business as usual. He came home late in the afternoon and said he was to dine with 3 friends that evening, a business deal. He left about 6 o'clock.
Who were the 3 friends?
He didn't tell me and I didn't ask. I made it a point never to interfere with his business.
Did you notice anything peculiar when he said goodbye to you that night?
No, not a thing. He kissed me goodbye and said he'd try to be home early that evening. I walked him to the door and watched him drive away. I remember thinking how happy we were. What a perfect dream our love had been. A relationship based on mutual trust. How could I know that this love through jealousy would bring about his death?
Objection, Your Honor. Would that be stricken out?
Stay. Last sentence may be removed.
Thank you, Mrs. Faulkner. That is all.
Will you be able to answer a few questions for me now, Mrs. Faulkner?
As many as you wish, Mr. Stevens.
Oh, let's see. You said that your romance was like a perfect dream, didn't you?
Yes.
A sacred trust with the past having no part.
Yes.
A beautiful relationship based on that trust.
Yes.
Then why did you hire a detective to spy upon your husband?
I didn't hire a detective to spy on my husband. I hired him to protect Bjorn.
Protect him? Would you explain that?
Well, some time ago, Bjorn had been threatened by a gangster, Larry Regan. He was not concerned, but I was very upset. After we were married, I hired Mr. Van Fleet to watch Bjorn. I did it without his knowledge because I knew he would be upset.
How could a detective following Mr. Faulkner at a distance protect him?
Well, I didn't dare think the underworld would harm a man who was being constantly watched.
Oh, so all Mr. Van Fleet had to do was to watch Mr. Faulkner.
Yes.
Mr. Faulkner alone.
Yes.
Not Mr. Faulkner
Mr. Stevens, I find that remark insulting to me.
I'm sorry, Mrs. Faulkner, but I haven't noticed you sparing the insults.
I
Now,
can...
you said that you saw, you said that Mr. Faulkner told you that he never wanted to see Miss Andre again after the wedding.
Yes.
And yet, after the wedding, he gave her his penthouse, the most luxurious apartment in Jackson. Your detective did tell you that, didn't he?
Yes, I knew it.
How do you explain it?
I can't explain it. How do I know what blackmail she was holding over his head?
How do you explain the fact that on the evening of January 16th, your husband lied to you about dining with 3 friends and instead went directly to Miss Andre's house?
Mr. Stevens, if I could explain that, perhaps I could save you the bother of this trial. We would have an explanation of my husband's death. All I know is that she invited him to her home that evening for reasons he could not tell me, and it was that night he was found dead.
That's all.
Your Honor, may I ask her a question?
Granted.
Did you love Bjorn Faulkner?
I did, Miss Andre.
Then how can you sit there and lie about him like you did? Don't you know why he married you? Your Honor, Mrs. Faulkner! Is it? One of us is lying, and we both know which one it is.
Court will stand adjourned. Matron, would you please remove her? Excuse me, ma'am. You may be seated now. The people of the state of Mississippi versus Karen Andre.
Ready, Your Honor.
Ready, Your Honor.
State calls Magda Svensson.
Magda Svensson.
Hey, honey, I like them sheep.
Do you solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I swear.
Is it clean enough now?
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome.
What is your name?
You know it, you just call me.
Kindly answer my questions without argument. Please state your name.
Magda Svensson.
What country do you come from?
A Swede never come from any country but Sweden.
What is your occupation?
I been housekeeper.
By whom were you employed last?
By Herr Bjorn Faulkner, and before that by his father.
How long have you been employed by them?
I've been in the family 38 years. I known Herr Bjorn since he was a little kid.
When did you come to America?
I've been here 5 years.
What were the duties that Mr. Faulkner assigned you?
I keep penthouse for him. I stay even after he go, after marriage, when he give penthouse to her. But I never work for this one.
Now, Mrs. Svensson...
Miss Svensson.
I beg your pardon. Miss Svensson.
That's all right.
What did you know about Miss Andre's connections with Mr. Faulkner?
Decent woman like me shouldn't know about such things, but sin is shameless in this world.
Tell us about it.
From very first day she come, she tried to get her claws in Herr Faulkner. It's very bad thing when secretary folk gets to secretary.
Was she in love with Faulkner?
Only the heart can love. This one has no heart. No, she won't know too much about Herr Faulkner's business.
Was Faulkner in love with her?
And he married to the other woman? No, good man never loves double.
Then why did he insist on keeping her?
Before he know it, she know too much about his business, and when she got her claws in him really good, she make him spend much money on her. You try and count all money he waste on that woman.
Can you give us any instances of this extravagance?
I can, so. He had a platinum gown made for her. Yes, platinum. It was very fine mesh and soft as silk, and she wore it on her naked body. She would have a fire in the fireplace, and she would heat the dress, and she would have me put it on her as hot as she could stand. And if it burned her shameless skin, she would laugh like the pagan she was, say it was man kissing her wild like tiger.
Your Honor, we object.
Let me ask the witness to word her testimony more modestly, please.
These are facts pertinent to the vital issues in this case, Your Honor.
But, Your Honor,
Sin is sin, Judge, no matter what name we call it.
How did Mr. Faulkner act at the time of his marriage to Miss Whitfield?
Oh, he was happy for the first time in his life. He was happy like a decent man would want the right road.
Did you know of anything that made him worry in those days that could bring him eventually to suicide?
No, nothing.
Now tell us, Miss Benson, what was Miss Andre's attitude towards the other woman?
She silent like stone sphinx. But I hear her crying one night, crying sobbing at the first only time in her life.
Why was she crying?
I not know. All women cry sometimes just to cry.
Was she crying because she had lost Faulkner?
No, not her. She lose one man, she find another. I seen her kissing another man the very same night of Herr Faulkner's wedding.
What man?
I not know. I see him the first time the night of Herr Faulkner's wedding.
Well, tell us about it.
I gone to wedding. Oh, it was beautiful. The young bride, all white and lovely as lily, and my poor Herr Bjorn, so handsome. It was like looking at my own children. But she not go to wedding.
Well, did Miss Faulkner stay at home?
Yeah, she stay home all right. I come back from wedding early. I come in service interest, she not hear me. She was home, but she was not alone.
Who was with her?
He was, the man. I sees him out on the terrace. He's in the garden, and he takes her in his arms and he kiss her, the sinner.
And then?
And then she step aside, she say something very soft I not hear. He not say word. He just take her hand and he hold it. And he hold it so long I get tired of it and I go back to my room.
Did you see the man leave?
No, I didn't.
Did you see him again?
Yes, once.
And that was?
The night of January 16th.
Tell us about it, Miss Benson.
She was very strange that day. She called me and tell me I have day off, and I been suspicious.
Why were you suspicious?
Because it was Wednesday and my day off is Thursday, and I'm not asked for second day off. But she says she not need me, so I go.
What time did you go?
About 4 o'clock. But I want no secret. I come back.
When did you come back?
About 10 o'clock. I come back, the house is dark. She not home, so I wait. About half an hour later, I hear them come. I see Herr Bjorn with her. I'm afraid to stay. But before I leave, I see 2 men with him. Oh, and the one man, oh, he drunk.
Oh, and who was he?
I never seen him before.
Did you know the other one?
Yes, he was the man, the sinner, the one I seen kiss her on Herr Faulkner's wedding night.
That's all, Miss Benson. Thank you.
Thank you.
just a minute, Miss Spencer. You still have to have a little talk with me.
For what? I tell all I know.
Well, you may know the answer to a few more questions. For instance, you had stated at the inquest that you'd seen this stranger making love to Miss Andre.
Yeah, I say so.
But you just now stated that you couldn't even hear them. Now, remember, you are under oath. If you couldn't even hear them, you can't really swear that you made love to her, can you?
No, but I can swear that he didn't either.
Can you really swear that he even kissed her?
With my own 2 eyes, I saw the sinner do it.
Well, after all, what is so wrong about a man kissing a woman?
Listen, mister, maybe you don't know, maybe you are too young to be experienced, but I know that a kiss is the last door in heaven before a woman falls into hell.
simultaneously spying upon your mistress, you hurried to depart in order not to be caught. Am I correct?
You have good memory.
You just had a swift glance at the two gentlemen with him.
Yes.
Could you tell me what that drunken man looked like?
No, no time to notice face and too dark at door.
Oh, so it was too dark to identify this drunken man? But you could recognize this stranger you had seen but one time before, Miss Vincent?
Listen, mister. I'm under oath that you say, and I'm a religious woman. I respect oath. But I say it once, I say it again, it was the same man. What do you think? I know nothing about men.
That's all.
Any redirect, Mr. Flint?
No, Your Honor.
You may step down now.
Thank you.
Tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
I do.
What is your name?
John Graham Whitfield.
What is your business, or rather, your occupation?
I'm president of the Whitfield National Bank.
Were you related to the late Bjorn Faulkner?
I was his father-in-law.
It is obvious, Mr. Whitfield, that you are well qualified to pass judgment on financial matters. Can you tell us the state of Mr. Faulkner's business immediately preceding his death?
I should say it was desperate, but not hopeless. My bank made a loan of $150 million to Mr. Faulkner. Needless to say, that money is lost.
What prompted you to make that loan, Mr. Whitfield?
He was the husband of my only daughter. Her happiness has always been paramount to me. But my motives were not entirely personal. Realizing the countless tragedies to small investors that the crash would bring, I felt it my duty to do everything I could to prevent it.
Is it possible, Mr. Whitfield, that you would have risked such a considerable sum in Faulkner's enterprises if you believed them hopelessly destined to crash?
Certainly not. It was a difficult undertaking, but I thought the crash could have been prevented had Faulkner lived.
He therefore had no reason to commit suicide, as far as his business affairs were concerned.
He had every reason for remaining alive.
Now, Mr. Whitfield, can you tell us whether Mr. Faulkner was happy in his personal life, in his relations with your daughter?
Mr. Flint, I've always regarded the home and the family as the most important institutions in our lives. You therefore will believe me when I tell you how important my daughter's happiness was to me. And she had found perfect happiness with Mr. Faulkner.
Mr. Whitfield, what did you know about Mr. Faulkner personally?
Well, I think it only fair to admit that he had certain qualities of which I could not approve. We were as unlike as two human beings could be. I believe in one's duty to others above all. Faulkner believed in nothing but himself.
From your knowledge of him, Mr. Whitfield, would you say that you consider it possible that Mr. Faulkner committed suicide?
I consider it absolutely impossible.
Thank you, Mr. Whitfield. That's all.
Mr. Whitfield, were you very fond of your son-in-law?
Yes?
And you never disagreed with him? You never lost your temper in a quarrel?
Mr. Stevens, I don't lose my temper.
If memory serves me, there was some kind of trouble when your company made that loan to him.
It's purely a misunderstanding, I assure you.
Oh.
Mr. Faulkner made a somewhat unethical attempt to hasten the loan, which was quite unnecessary since I granted it gladly for my daughter's sake.
You said that your fortune had been badly damaged by the Faulkner crash?
Yes?
And that your financial condition at the moment is rather strained?
Yes.
Then, how could you afford to offer a $100,000 reward for the arrest and conviction of Larry Riggs?
Because
Objection, that has nothing to do with this case.
Your Honor, I should like to have the privilege of answering that.
Very well, Mr. Whitfield.
I did offer such a reward. The gentleman commonly known as Larry Reagan is a notorious criminal who specializes in extorting money for so-called protection. Not only had he menaced Mr. Faulkner, but he had threatened to kidnap my daughter. I offered that reward for evidence that would make his arrest and conviction possible.
Mr. Whitfield, could you tell me why you and your daughter disappeared so suddenly after the night of January 16th?
I think the answer is obvious. My daughter was crushed by the sudden tragedy. I hastened to take her away to save her health.
You love your daughter profoundly.
Yes,
You've always made it a point that her every desire be granted.
I can proudly say yes.
And when you or she desires anything, you don't stop at the price, do you?
Well, Mr. Stevens,
Then
we
would you
never had...
refuse to buy her the man that she wants?
Mr. Stevens!
You wouldn't stop if it took your last dime to break the first unbreakable man that you had ever...
Your
Honor, we object.
Sustained.
Now, Mr. Whitfield, suppose you'll tell us that money had nothing to do with Miss Andre being dismissed, that no ultimatum was delivered?
You're quite mistaken in your insinuation. My daughter was not in the least jealous of Miss Andre.
I'd be careful of statements like that, Mr. Whitfield. You, whose daughter was elevated to the highest state of matrimony by purchase...
How could he... Why you...
Honor, we object.
You-
Counsel has no right to insult this witness.
You impudent upstart! Don't you know I could crush you like a worm? Like I've crushed many a better man before you? I...
Whitfield, that was exactly what I wanted. That's all.
Your Honor, we move the defense counsel's outrageous remarks which led to this incident be stricken from the record.
Remarks may go out. Redirect Mr. Flint.
No, thank you, Your Honor.
You may step down, Mr. Whitfield.
Your Honor, the people rest.
Your Honor, move that the case be dismissed for lack of... Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, we cannot pass judgment on Karen Andre until we pass judgment on Bjorn Faulkner. He was a man who had put himself outside of all human standards. Whether above them or below them is for each of us to decide personally. But I'll ask you to remember that Mr. Faulkner was a man that said that he needed no reason for his actions. He alone was reason enough for anything. He was a man that said that the laws were for the weak and that the strong were the laws. If you will remember this, you will understand why the financial conditions that Mr. Faulkner found himself in his last days were so intolerable to him that he would resort to the most desperate means to escape, including suicide. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is what the defense will prove. Your Honor, our first witness will be Sigurd Youngquist.
Do you solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Please be seated.
Just a second. Mrs. Hutchins, swallow the gum.
What is your name?
Sigurd Youngquist.
And what was the last occupation if you don't...
My last job was secretary to head Bjorn Faulkner.
How long have you held that position?
Since last November. No, since Miss Andre left.
And what was your position before that?
I was bookkeeper for head Bjorn Faulkner.
Did Mr. Faulkner give you Miss Andre's position when she was dismissed?
Yes.
And did Miss Andre train you in your duties?
Yes, she did.
What was her behavior at that time? Did she seem angry, sorrowful, or resentful?
No, she was really calm like always. She explained everything real clear to me.
Did you ever notice any difficulty of any kind between Miss Andre and Mr. Faulkner?
Lawyer, there can be no more trouble between Herr Faulkner and Miss Andre than between you and your shadow.
And did you ever notice any business conferences between Mr. Faulkner and Mr. Whitfield?
I've never been present at conferences, but Herr Whitfield come to offices many times, and Herr Whitfield not like Herr Faulkner.
Just a minute, Your Honor.
Sorry, Mr. Stevens.
Your Honor, I'd like to report this incident, which, by the way, I consider to be a hoax. Someone just called on the phone and asked to speak to me. When told that was impossible, they left this message. Do not put Karen Andre on the stand until I get there. There was no name.
I want to go to the stand right now.
Yeah, that's why, Miss Andre.
Question me now, Mr. Stevens,
I'm afraid it's
please.
impossible, Miss Andre. I don't even know what to do.
Well, then hurry, please, hurry.
What's the hurry, Miss Andre? Are you expecting someone?
You don't have to answer that, Miss Andre.
But in view of this strange behavior and these irregularities...
That's enough. Miss Andre, do not interrupt these proceedings again.
Your Honor, that ruling should apply to the district attorney.
Another outburst of this, and either one of you will find the defense counsel in contempt of court. Please go on, Mr. Stevens.
Mr. Whitfield did not like Mr. Faulkner very much. What made you say that?
Well, because I heard what he said one day. You see, Herr Faulkner was in need of much money, and Herr Whitfield, he come to office and he asking, what will you do if business is to fail? Well, Herr Faulkner, he just shrugged and he said, oh, I commit suicide. And Herr Whitfield looked at him really strange and said really slow, if you do, make a good job of it.
That's all, Mr. Youngquist. Your witness.
Mr. Youngquist, where were you employed before you started with Mr. Faulkner?
Well, I worked for a bank in Stockholm.
But you were not working there immediately preceding your job with Faulkner?
No.
Where were you at that time?
I was in prison.
Would you please repeat that, Mr. Youngquist?
I was in prison.
So you were in jail. On what charge?
Embezzlement.
You absconded from your bank with 1,000,000 kroner, didn't you?
Yes, I did, but Herr Faulkner got me out of prison and gave me a chance to go straight.
Oh, Faulkner did. He gave you a chance to go straight so that you could help him go crooked. You've been employed by Faulkner for 5 years, haven't you?
Yes.
Did you know all that time he was crooked?
No, I did not know that.
You know now that he was a
No,
swindler?
I didn't know that either.
No, Dan, you didn't know what all those brilliant plans
I knew he could do what other men could not do, but I know it was not wrong.
How did you know that?
Because he was hair beyond Faulkner.
Oh, I see. The king could do no
And
wrong.
liar, when you and I meet a man like that, Father, we take orders and do not ask questions.
Splendid, my dear Mr. Youngquist. Your devotion to your master is worthy of admiration. Are you very devoted to Miss Andre, too?
Oh, Miss Andre served Herr Faulkner.
Then such a little matter as a few lies for your
Herr
master's sake.
liar, I have not lied. Herr Faulkner is dead. He cannot ask me to lie. But if, my friend, I have choice, I lie for Herr beyond Father, then tell truth to the likes of you.
For which statement I am more grateful than you can guess, Herr Youngquist. That's all.
Any redirected proceedings?
No, Your Honor.
You may step down, Mr. Youngquist.
Your Honor, defense counsel calls Karen Andre. What is your name?
Karen Andre,
And what was your last occupation, Miss Andre?
secretary to Bjorn Faulkner.
Would you tell us about your first meeting with Mr. Faulkner?
I first met Mr. Faulkner at his office in Stockholm. I'd come in answer to an advertisement that he'd placed for a stenographer. It was my first job.
How did Mr. Faulkner greet you?
Well, he got up and he didn't say a word. He just stood and stared at me. No one could stand his gaze very long. I didn't know whether to kneel or to slap his face. So I didn't do either. I just told him why I'd come.
Did he engage you then?
No. He told me I was too young and that he didn't like me. But he threw a stenographer's pad at me and told me to get down to work. He was a very busy man.
And you worked all day?
All day. He dictated as fast, almost faster than he could talk. And he never took his eyes off me, not once. He acted as if he were trying to crack a whip over an animal he wanted to break.
What happened when you finished?
When I finished, I told him I was quitting. I went to get my coat. He tapped on the desk once. I stopped, looked at him, didn't say a word. Then after a moment he said, tomorrow at 9, here. I left without saying a word. I went to my apartment that night, but I couldn't stop thinking about him, his eyes staring at me all that time. The next morning, I was in his office at 9.
And you worked, and you planned, and you rose to success with Mr. Faulkner.
Yes.
Could you tell me the extent of Mr. Faulkner's personal fortune at the height of his success?
He had no personal fortune. He always said that the world belonged to he who could use it. So he took what he wanted. In his business, when one of his accounts needed money, he simply just charged it, crossed it off the books, and charged it to some other account. And thus he balanced his books. It was very simple.
Why did a man of Mr. Faulkner's obvious genius resort to such methods?
He wanted to build a net, a gigantic net over the entire world, and he wanted to do it fast, in his lifetime.
When did his business difficulties begin, Miss Andre?
About 2 years ago.
Tell us about it.
Well, all of his corporations had begun to need money at the same time, so it was no longer simple just to charge it from one account to the other without throwing the whole business into a weak financial position and thus threatening us with bankruptcy.
What did you do?
Well, a $150 million loan was necessary. We tried to get it from the Whitfield Investment Corporation, but Mr. Whitfield refused. That is, until his daughter came into the picture.
And how did that happen?
She met Bjorn at a party one night. She made it quite obvious that she was greatly interested in him, and he kept up the acquaintance, strictly for diplomatic reasons. And then one day he came to me and he said, "Karen, we only have one piece of collateral left and you're holding it. You'll have to let me borrow it for a while." And I said, "Certainly, Bjorn, what is it?" He said it was himself. And I said, "For Nancy Lee Whitfield?" And he said, "Yes." I didn't answer for a moment, and then finally I said, "Certainly, Bjorn."
Had Mr. Faulkner proposed to Miss Whitfield?
Oh, no, she proposed to him.
How do you know that?
Well, he told me. She took him out one night on a drive out on some dark, lonely little road. She stopped, looked at him point blank, and said, "What's the use in pretending? I want you, and you know it. You don't want me, and I know that too. But I have the price." And he said, "What is the price?" And she said, "Oh, a certain $150 million loan that you'll need to keep your business up."
That's a shameless lie. How can you? Anyone else who interrupts these proceedings will be asked to move the courtrooms. Whitfield, please sit down.
What was Mr. Faulkner's answer to that, Miss Andre?
He said, "It's costing you an awful lot of money." She said, "Money's never meant anything to me at all." And he said, "Well, will you remember that it's strictly a business deal?" She said, "Certainly. You'll have your money, and I'll have you." Such was the bargain.
And was Mr. Whitfield eager to accept that bargain?
Bjorn said he thought that Mr. Whitfield would have a stroke when he found out. But Miss Whitfield insisted. She always had her way.
In other words, Mr. Faulkner sold himself as his last security.
Yes.
Did you resent that marriage?
Well, no. We'd always faced our business as a war, and of course when any war reaches a crisis, something has to be sacrificed. Time for my sacrifice had come. But it was harder for Bjorn than it was for me.
Then why did Mr. Faulkner dismiss you 2 weeks after the wedding?
He was forced to do it. Mr. Whitfield would not advance the money until it was done.
And what reason did he offer for that?
It was Miss Whitfield's ultimatum. I had to be discharged.
And did Mr. Whitfield grant that loan after you were dismissed?
No. Bjorn took it.
How did he take it?
By forging Mr. Whitfield's signature on $150 million worth of securities.
How do you know that?
I helped him to do it.
Did this $150 million help Mr. Faulkner?
Only temporarily. You see, Bjorn had stretched his credit to the limit. There was very little to be had.
How did he take this situation?
Oh, you don't find men like Bjorn Faulkner cringing in front of bankruptcy commissions. You don't find them rotting away in jail either.
What was the plan?
Well, he'd come into the world as its master. He was going to leave it whenever...
Karen, stop!
Larry! Why? What do you mean?
Faulkner is dead.
Oh, my God.
Well, of course he's dead, Miss Andre. You're on trial for his murder. Don't tell me you didn't know that. No, she didn't know that. She was arrested for Faulkner's murder. He was still alive.
Oh, he is alive. He is alive, and you're lying to me. He is waiting for me. He's waiting for me. You're lying to me. No, no, no.
I'm telling you, now, things are
He
changing.
is alive, and he is waiting for me.
This court stands adjourned.
All rise. All rise. The Honorable Judge Wilhelmina Heath presiding.
You may be seated. The people of the state of Mississippi versus
first took the stand yesterday, did you know the full truth about this case?
No.
In view of the circumstances which have arisen, would you wish to retract any of your previous testimony?
No.
When you first took the stand, did you intend to shield anyone?
Yes.
Whom?
Bjorn Faulkner.
And do you still find it necessary to protect Mr. Faulkner?
No, it's not necessary anymore.
Do you still claim that Mr. Faulkner committed suicide?
No, he did not commit suicide. He was murdered. I didn't do it. I don't care if you believe me or not. It doesn't matter what you do to me. But you cannot let his murder remain unpunished. I did throw a body off the penthouse roof that night. But that body was dead before I even touched it. It was not the body of Bjorn Faulkner.
When the court adjourned yesterday, you were about to tell us about Mr. Faulkner's way and his difficulties.
I told you he was going to leave the world whenever and however he pleased, but I did not mean that he was to commit suicide. Bjorn wanted to be reported as dead, so he decided to stage a fake suicide and then just disappear. I was to go with him. He had this plan in mind for quite some time, and he'd get $70 million of the Whitfield money just for that purpose. But we needed someone to help us with this, somebody who couldn't be connected with him in any way, and we only knew of one such person, and that was Larry Regan.
What made you believe that Mr. Regan would help you in so dangerous an undertaking?
He loved me.
And he helped you in spite of that?
He did it because of that.
What was the plan, Miss Andre?
Regan was to get a body. That night, January the 16th, Lenny O'Toole, a gangster, was shot. O'Toole's measurements, height, weight, body build were all the same as Bjorn's. So Regan stole the body. And he was the man that I threw off the penthouse. He was the body.
And was that the extent of Mr. Regan's involvement?
No, Regan is also an airplane pilot. He was also to secure a plane to take Bjorn down to South America. That day, on January the 16th, Bjorn had transferred the $70 million down to 3 different banks in Buenos Aires under the assumed name of Ragnar Hayden. A year later, the 3 of us were to meet at the Hotel Continental in Buenos Aires, and until that time, none of us were to speak to each other. No matter what happened, we were not to reveal the secret between us.
Tell us what happened on the night of January 16th.
Bjorn came to my house for dinner that night. I'll never forget his smile when he walked out of the elevator. He loved danger. We had dinner together, and then we went over to Regan's place. Regan had the body dressed in very formal clothes to make it look as if we were all going to a big thing. Then Regan, Bjorn, and myself drove back to my apartment with the body, and we went to the door, but Bjorn did not want me to use my key. He wanted to be seen entering the building, so he told me not to use my key. So I rang the bell, and Bjorn and Regan supported the body to make it look like he were a drunken friend or something. We were all dressed very formally to make it look as if we'd been out to some big party, and the wife of the night janitor came, and she opened the door and let us in, and we went up in the elevator.
And then what happened?
When we got up to my apartment, Bjorn exchanged clothes with the corpse, and then he wrote the letter and left it sitting on the middle of the dining room table where anyone could see it. And then the 3 of us had a drink, and then they took the body out onto the penthouse roof and left it leaning up against the railing. And then it was time for us to say goodbye. Bjorn went first. I watched him as he got in the elevator and watched the needle as it went down, and when it stopped, I knew he was gone.
And then,
Regan followed 10, 15 minutes later. They were to meet a few miles out of town where Regan had hidden the plane, and I had to wait there in the penthouse for an hour by myself. I didn't want to wait out in the garden where the body was, so I waited in my bedroom, and there was a clock next to the bed, and it ticked and ticked and ticked. And I just waited for an hour, and then after an hour, I knew they were on the plane, and they were on their way to Buenos Aires, and I got up. I tore my dress to make it look like a struggle. I picked up my gun and went outside to where the body was, and I fired my gun into the air once to explain the bullet wound that was in O'Toole's body if it were discovered. And I must have been nervous because I dropped the gun and I forgot to wipe my fingerprints off of it. I just left it there, and I went over to the body and I pushed it over as hard as I could, and I thought that all of Bjorn's troubles went with it. And I didn't know that his life went with it, too.
that's all, Miss Andre. Counselor.
Miss Andre, you said you lied at the inquest,
Yes,
and you lied to your attorney,
yes.
and the story you have just told us here is entirely different from the story you came into court prepared to tell.
Yes, it is.
Well, then how are we to believe a word of it? How do we know when you're lying and when you're telling the truth?
Objection, Your Honor.
Sustained.
Now tell us, Miss Andre, didn't Mr. Faulkner have a clear conception of the difference between right and wrong?
Bjorn did not care about right or wrong. It was to him it was only you can or you can't, and he always could.
And yourself? Did you object to helping him in all of his swindles?
No, to me it was always he wants or he doesn't want.
You loved Bjorn Faulkner,
Yes,
such as he was.
because he was such as he was.
Exactly, Miss Andre. Now, what would you do if a woman were to take away from you the man that you loved so insanely? If she changed the ruthless brute you loved into her own ideal of an upright man, would you still love him?
Your Honor, we object.
Sustained.
But, Your Honor, I want to answer. I want Mr. Flint to know that he is insulting the memory of Bjorn Faulkner.
You do.
Yes.
But you thought nothing of insulting him while he was alive by dividing your love with a racketeer. Why, you lousy...
Larry, don't. You're wrong, Mr. Flint. Regan loved me. I did not love him.
And he didn't demand your love for his help.
He demanded nothing.
You didn't ask him to help you take revenge on your first lover?
No.
Why so particular, Miss Andre? Is there much difference between a swindler and a racketeer?
Objection.
Sustained.
Yes, let's see. You said you were the only one who knew all the details of Faulkner's swindling activities.
Yes.
You had enough information to send him to jail at any time.
Well, I would never do that.
But you could if you wanted to.
Well, I suppose so.
Well, Miss Andre, isn't that the explanation of Faulkner's visits to you after his marriage? He had reformed. He wanted to avoid a crash and make good to his creditors, but you held it over his head. You could expose him. You could ruin him before he made good for his crimes. Now, which was it that held him in your hands, Miss Andre? Love or fear?
Bjorn Faulkner never knew the meaning of the word fear.
Miss Andre, who knew about that transfer of $70 million to Buenos Aires?
Bjorn, myself, and Regan.
Not just yourself and Regan alone.
No.
With your knowledge of Faulkner's business, could not you and Regan alone have transferred that money to Buenos Aires?
No, that would not have been necessary. If I had only asked, Bjorn would have given me the money.
Miss Andre, Bjorn Faulkner kept you in extravagant luxury.
Yes.
You hated to change your mode of living. You hated to see him turn his fortune over to his investors, to see him poor.
No one was ever to see him poor.
Well, of course not, because you and your underworld lover were going to murder him and take the $70 million that no one knew about.
Objection, Your Honor.
Sustained.
You've heard it testified that Faulkner had no reason to commit suicide, that his marriage to Miss Whitfield had given him the first happiness he'd ever known. And you hated him for that happiness, didn't you?
You don't understand Bjorn Faulkner.
Well, maybe I don't understand Bjorn Faulkner, but let me see if I understand you. You formed a partnership with a swindler the first day you met him. With
are wrong, Mr. Flint. I am very capable of murder for Bjorn Faulkner's sake.
Thank you, Miss Andre. That's all.
May you read the records, Mr. Stevens?
No, Your Honor.
You may step down, Miss Andre.
The whole truth and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Please be seated.
What is your name?
Lawrence Regan,
And what is your occupation, Mr. Regan?
unemployed.
When did you first meet Miss Andre?
About a year and a half ago.
Where did you meet her?
Met her at Faulkner's office. I went in there to do some business and forgot about the business when I met his secretary.
Could you tell me how you happened to become friends with Miss Andre?
Well, it wasn't exactly friendly at first. As a matter of fact, she wouldn't even let me in to see Faulkner. She said I had enough money to buy orchids by the pound. So I left and thought it over. Decided the next day to send her a pound of orchids. And that's how it started.
Did you know that Miss Andre loved Mr. Faulkner?
So what of it? I knew it was hopeless, but I couldn't help it.
And you never expected Miss Andre to share in your feelings?
No.
You never made any attempt to force them upon her?
Do we have to go into all of that?
Yes, sir, I'm afraid we do.
Well, I kissed her once, by force. It was the day of Faulkner's wedding, and she was all alone and seemed very unhappy. And I didn't want her to know that, or to think that, well, at any rate, she knew. And she said it was useless, and we haven't mentioned it since.
Could you tell me when Miss Andre first told you of Faulkner's plans to escape to South America?
About 2 weeks before we pulled it.
Was Lenny O'Toole one of your men?
No.
Were you connected with his murder in any way?
No, I'm sorry to say.
You actually had no definite knowledge of his planned death?
No, but I had my way of guessing.
Tell us what happened on 16th of January.
Well, it's just as Miss Andre has told you, only she only knows half the story, and I know the rest.
Could you tell me what happened after you left the penthouse?
Well, Faulkner left about 10 minutes before I did. He took my car to cover up his identity. I got another one of my men to bring another car around, and I got in it and stepped on it full speed.
Where did you go?
Went to Meadow Lane. It's about 10 miles out in Rankin County. I had my plane out there, and I was to meet Faulkner there. We were to leave immediately for South America.
And what time did you get there?
It was about midnight. I remember it because it was a full moon, and I turned off the road, and I could see the tracks in the mud where Faulkner had driven the car. But then I thought I'd lose my mind. I couldn't find the airplane.
What did you do?
Well, I looked around for that plane, but it wasn't anywhere in sight. The car was there, but it was empty, and the keys were in the ignition, lights were off. Then I noticed on the ground that the tire tracks from the plane had taken off, but Faulkner was not a pilot, and he could not fly that plane alone.
Were there any clues to this mystery?
Yes, there was one. A car I found hidden in the brush.
What kind of a car?
A big black Lincoln.
Mr. Stevens, would you please get off the phone?
And then what did you do?
Well, then I wanted to find out who owned that Lincoln. So I settled down in the back seat to wait.
And how long did you have to wait?
The rest of the night.
And then?
And then the owner showed up. I saw him coming to the car, and he really looked kind of weird. His clothes were all wrinkled and grease-spotted.
What did you do?
Well, I just pretended I was asleep in the back seat, and he opened the door and saw me and looked like he was scared to death, gave a start, looked like somebody had struck him.
And then what did you do?
Well, I stretched and rubbed my eyes and said, "Oh, it's you." He looks at me and says, "So who are you?" I said, "My name's Lawrence Regan. You may have heard of me. I've been in a little trouble and had to hide out. This car was certainly convenient." And he said, "Well, you're going to have to leave because I'm in a hurry."
And did you get out?
No, I just stretched and rubbed my eyes again and said, "What's your hurry?" He said it was none of my business, and I said, "Listen, I'd like to hear the rest of this story."
And what did he say?
Well, he didn't say anything. He shrugged and looked at me, and then I shrugged and looked back at him. Then he reached in his pocket and pulls out this checkbook and says, "Will $50,000 be enough?" I said, "That'll do." So he proceeds to write out this check for $50,000, and as a matter of fact, here it is.
Your Honor, I offer this check in evidence.
What is all this nonsense? Who was the man?
Who was the man, Mr. Regan?
The clerk can read the name off the check.
Would you kindly read the check?
Paid to the order of Lawrence Regan, $50,000. Signed, John Graham.
This is an outrage.
I demand to see that check.
Your Honor, we offer this check in evidence.
Objection?
Objection overruled, admitted in evidence.
What did you do after you received this check, Mr. Regan? Excuse me.
Then I pulled my gun out and I stuck it in his ribs. This is all right, you SOB. What did you do
Your
with
Honor,
Faulkner?
this man going to be allowed to make such statements?
The witness is allowed to testify. However, he is not allowed to use profanity in my court. If what he is saying is perjury, he will suffer the consequences.
What did he answer, Mr. Regan?
Well, he said he didn't know what I was talking about. So I stuck the gun a little bit harder in his ribs and said, listen, I've got no time to wait. What did you do with him?
And did you ever get any information out of him?
No, I threatened and threatened, but got nowhere, so I decided to let him go. I knew where I could find him, and besides, I wasn't ready to kill him. Not yet.
And did you try to find Mr. Faulkner?
Yes, I didn't waste any time. I went back to my hotel and changed into some flying clothes and grabbed another plane and took off immediately to South America. I searched everywhere. I even put ads in the paper. Checked with the banks to see if anybody had inquired about the money we had transferred in the name of Ragnar Hayden. But I heard nothing.
And did you try to communicate about this with Miss Andre?
No, I didn't. We had promised not to communicate for a year. It wasn't long after I arrived that I read in the newspaper that she was arrested for Faulkner's murder, and that really made me laugh. But there was nothing I could do because I did not want to portray Faulkner if indeed he was not dead. So I waited.
What were you waiting for?
I was waiting for the time to pass. I got a room at the Hotel Continental, and I settled down to wait for what seemed like eternity. But he never came.
And then?
Then I knew he was dead. So I grabbed another plane and flew back to Jackson to search for my plane, and I found it yesterday.
Where did you find it?
About 20 miles from Meadow Lane. It was hidden in a wooded area. I could tell it was my airplane because I found the serial number on the engine. Someone had hid it in the woods and set it on fire.
Mr. Regan, was that plane empty?
No, it wasn't. There was the body of a man in it.
Could you identify him?
No one could. It was nothing but a burned-up skeleton. But it was Faulkner, all right. It was the same size and height. I examined the remains, and I found 2 bullet holes in the bones. One in the right hand and one in the rib, just above the heart. Someone had evidently shot him in the right hand, then when he was defenseless, murdered him straight through the heart.
That's all, Mr. Regan. Thank you. Your witness.
What is your business, Mr. Regan?
Mr. Flynn, I have refused that information to others, and it'd be so partial just to tell only you.
Mr. Regan, what do you do when prospective clients refuse to pay you protection?
I believe I have a legal right not to know what you're talking about.
Well, then I'll try to make it clear. May I question you as to whether you read the newspapers?
You certainly may.
Well,
So question me.
kindly state whether you read newspapers.
I do occasionally.
Did you happen to read that when Mr. James Sutton Vance Jr. refused to pay protection to a certain, shall we say, extortionist, his magnificent country house in Eastover was destroyed by an explosion just after the guests left, barely missing a wholesale slaughter? What was that, a coincidence?
An amazing coincidence, Mr. Flynn. Just after the guest had left.
Did you read that when Mr. Van Dorn refused to pay protection, his
Objection,
dogs...
Your Honor. Such questions are irrelevant.
Sustained.
So, you had no ill feelings towards Mr. Faulkner for the failure of your business with him?
No.
Now, Mr. Lawrence Regan, what would you do if someone were to take this woman that you love so much and throw her aside merely because he found someone else with more money?
Probably break every bone in his body.
You would.
I would.
And yet you expect us to believe that you, Larry Regan, outlaw, extortionist, scum of the earth, would step aside with a grand gesture and throw this same woman that you love back into the arms of this same man.
Your Honor, we object.
I loved her.
You did. Then why did you allow Faulkner to see her after his marriage?
Just a rare privilege.
You two didn't hold a blackmail plot over his head?
You got any proof of that?
Her association with you is the best proof.
Objection.
Sustained.
How did you kill Faulkner that night?
Objection.
Sustained.
Do you deny having any part in Faulkner's murder?
I do.
You deny that you were an accomplice to that murder?
I do.
But you admit knowledge of this fantastic plot which Miss Andre has just described?
Yes, I do.
To what extent did you participate?
I merely provided the corpse.
And nothing else?
Nothing else.
Exhibit B, please. You recognize this gun?
Can't say that I do.
Affidavit, please. I have here an affidavit that states that one .32 caliber pistol, serial number CC3490, was purchased by Lawrence Regan from a store in Tupelo.
Just a minute, Mr. Flynn. I'd like to have a look.
There is no CC3 or whatever number. There's no number on this gun.
Oh? Have you ever heard of the heat test?
No, I haven't.
Well, the heat test, the serial number on that gun has been filed off. But when heated red hot, it still discloses the serial number, CC3490.
This is sufficient, Mr. Flynn.
By the way, Mr. Regan, this is the gun found in the penthouse that night. The gun that Miss Andre claims that she fired in the air. The gun that Miss Andre claims was hers. Now, do you recognize it?
No, I don't.
Are you submitting your affidavit?
I would like to submit this affidavit of evidence, Your Honor.
Accepted. Exhibit F.
You admit being with Mr. Faulkner and Miss Andre in the penthouse that night?
I do.
Then perhaps you can tell us the whereabouts of your other accomplice? The one who played the drum.
Oh, you mean Lenny O'Toole? Sure, I can tell you where old Lenny is. Evergreen Cemetery, Whitfield Family Memorial, the swankiest place old Lenny has ever been.
Now, let me get this straight. You claim that the body you found in the airplane is Lenny, or is Bjorn Faulkner, and the body buried in the Whitfield Cemetery is Lenny O'Toole.
Yes.
Right. Well, tell me, Mr. Regan, what's to prove that it isn't the other way around? Supposing you did steal O'Toole's body. How do we know you didn't stage the whole thing yourself? That you didn't plant the airplane and the body in Rankin County, and then come here today with this fantastic story in this desperate attempt to save Miss Andre. You've heard her tell us that you'd do anything for her, that you'd lie for her, steal for her, murder for her.
Objection.
Sustained.
Where's your real proof, Mr. Regan, that that wasn't Bjorn Faulkner in the penthouse that night?
Mr. Flint, you're a district attorney, and well, you know what I am. We both have a lot of dirty work to do, such is life, or so it seems. But are we both so low that if something passes us for which one kneels, we no longer have eyes to see? I loved her, and she loved Faulkner, and that's our only proof.
That's all, Mr. Regan.
Can you read the record proceedings? You may step down, Mr. Regan.
Do you solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Certainly, why not?
Please be seated.
Your name?
Real or professional?
Both, if you don't mind.
Oh, I don't mind. My real name is Ruby O'Toole. But if we should ever get friendly, don't call me Ruby. I hate that name.
But professionally known as Roberta Van Rensselaer.
That's my nom de plume. I'm a terpsichorean.
You mean you dance?
Well, that's the common name for it.
Where were you last employed?
At the club Chez O'Toole, no cover charge.
And who was your employer?
Why, the owner, George Lenny O'Toole.
Were you related to him?
No, I was his wife.
I see. Now, tell me, did you know Larry Regan?
I've met the rat.
I take it you haven't much affection for him.
Let's just say if we was cast off on a lonely island together, it'd still be real lonely.
Why do you dislike him?
Because he killed Lenny O'Toole.
Objection, Your Honor.
Sustained.
I'm sorry, you must confine yourself to the facts of your own personal knowledge, Miss Van Rensselaer. Did O'Toole and Regan do business together?
No, if Lenny'd stooped that low, he would have broke his back.
Well, then would you say that they were rivals?
No, Regan might have thought so, but Lenny just considered him an amusement like golf or fishing.
When did you see Regan last?
See him or hear from him?
See him.
Oh, it was about a month before Lenny was rubbed out. Regan came over to the club one night and asked to speak to Lenny, and, well, Lenny had me sit in. He always did that because Regan had been trying to muscle in.
And what did Regan want that night?
Well, he said he wanted to sell out.
Was O'Toole interested in the proposition?
No, he said Regan didn't sit still long enough to get a good shine on the seat of his pants.
Miss O'Toole, will you please refrain from whatever motion it is you're making over there?
Why did he want to sell out?
Well, his story was he had some gal, and now she was on the run with some important money, and they had to put the equator between them and the income tax boys.
Did he happen to mention who the woman was?
No, but Lenny knew. He said it was some gal that worked in Faulkner's office, but that Faulkner would put a stop to it.
What did Regan say to that?
Well, he said that Faulkner was going away for good, and Lenny says, "You planning to erase him?" And Regan said, "No. He's going to commit a fake suicide, and won't he be surprised to find out it's real?"
Objection, Your Honor. This is hearsay and not admissible.
Overruled.
Do you recall the rest of the conversation?
Oh, they talked about a price for Regan's interest and said they'd meet later to settle the deal.
When did you hear from him again?
On the night of January 16th. Regan phoned the house and asked to speak to Lenny, and I put Lenny on the phone, and they talked for a while, and then Lenny said he was going out to the reservoir to settle the deal.
And he left the house to meet Regan.
Yes, to go to the reservoir, and he was put on the spot on the bridge.
He was killed that same night.
Yes, and an hour later, his body disappeared.
Your witness.
You are the widow of George O'Toole,
Yes,
and you admit that you hate Lawrence Regan.
I swear to it.
Haven't you allowed that fact to influence your testimony?
How do you mean?
I mean that you're here to get revenge. That you relate things that you know nothing about. For instance, you stated that Mr. Regan was losing money. How could you possibly know that?
Well, let's just say we kept better books for Regan than Regan kept for the government.
You said that your husband met his death on the 16th of January,
Yes.
and it was rumored that he was set up by rival mobsters.
Yes, and the man who did it was...
Based upon your answers to questions put to you, you believe he was killed by a rival?
Yes, and the man who did it was...
You said that Mr. Regan wasn't a rival, didn't you?
Look, mister, you don't have to consider a skunk your rival just because you try to keep him off your farm.
That's all, Miss Van Rensselaer.
Killing Lenny O'Toole was
That's
a dream.
all, Miss Van Rensselaer?
Any redirect, Mr. Flint?
No, Your Honor.
You may step down.
Well, it was dirty, Judge.
You may step down.
And a court order to examine the body in Evergreen Cemetery.
I have no objections, Mr. Stevens, but the body's been cremated.
Cremated?
Yes, the body was in such a condition it seemed the best thing to do.
And for no other reason.
Well, it has been a custom in our family for years.
Mr. Whitfield, where were you on the 16th of January?
At home,
Have you any witnesses to that?
Mr. Stevens, I've never felt it necessary to provide myself with alibis or keep track of my activities or provide witnesses for them. But if you insist, I believe I talked to my daughter
How many
that.
cars do you own, Mr. Whitfield?
I beg your pardon?
I said, how many cars do you own?
4.
And what are they?
One of them is a black Lincoln, which you are evidently anxious to learn. But may I remind you, it's not the only black Lincoln in Jackson.
You've just returned my plane from California.
I have.
You flew it yourself.
I did.
You're a licensed pilot, then.
I am.
And yet, in your opinion, that story of Mr. Regan's about your stealing his plane, flying into Rankin County and burning it is nothing but a lie?
It is.
Then who wrote that check for $50,000, Mr. Whitfield?
I did.
You admit it?
I do.
Explain yourself.
We all know Larry Regan's profession. He had threatened my daughter. I preferred to buy him off rather than risk the life of my child. So on the night of January 6th, I gave him a check for $50,000.
You mean you gave it to him on January 16th?
No, January 6th.
Mr. Whitfield, this check is January 16th.
Regan has added a 1 and made it the 16th.
Mean you changed the date?
You may recall your handwriting expert and find out.
Kindly refrain from advising me. Your daughter and your fortune are your most cherished possessions, aren't they, Mr. Whitfield?
They are.
And what would you do to the man who stole your money and deserted your daughter for another woman?
Object, Your Honor.
You hated
Objection
Paul.
sustained.
You hated Paul. You wanted to break him. You suspected his intentions of staging a suicide. The words Mr. Youngquist heard you say proved it.
I suspected nothing of the kind.
On the 16th of January, didn't you spend that day following him?
Certainly not.
Didn't you have any particular knowledge about his activities?
No,
You heard nothing unusual?
not a thing.
You did not hear about the transfer of that $70 million?
I knew nothing about it.
Oh my God! I can't be going fucked up. I helped that man to kill him. The whole truth, so help me God. I didn't know, but I see it now. He just bought it because he's lying about that $70 million transfer. Because I told him about it.
Step
Now, look
forward.
here, my man.
No,
You can't follow these proceedings in this fashion.
Kindly take a stand, Mr. Young.
He killed him.
You killed Faulkner! You killed him!
Right, Mr. Youngquist.
Miss Youngquist, take a stand. You told Mr. Whitfield about that transfer of $70 million.
Yes, I did. I didn't know it was a secret. And he come to me and he asked me many times about the $70 million, about where it went. And so I tell him about Buenos Aires. That day, January the 16th at noon.
You told Mr. Whitfield at noon.
Yes, I did. I didn't know it was a secret. I give my very life for Herr Bjorn Faulkner. Instead, I helped to kill him.
That's all, Mr. Youngquist. Your witness.
Mr. Youngquist, were you alone with Mr. Whitfield when you told him?
Yes?
Then it's the word of an ex-convict against that of John Graham Whitfield. That's all, Mr. Youngquist.
Any redirecting proceedings?
No, Your Honor.
Gallup, will you help the witness from the stand, please?
I didn't know. I didn't know, I'm sorry.
The district attorney may now conclude this case. The defense may proceed. I'm sorry. Go on.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Sergeant.
Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, in a few moments, you will be called upon to decide the fate of a woman. And her very life will rest in your hands. I am here to plead for that life. Karen Andre has confessed to many questionable things here, things which may arouse you against her. But I ask you to remember that she is not on trial for those things. She is only on trial for the murder of Bjorn Faulkner. And to hold her guilty of that murder, you must convince yourself of two things. That she had a motive, and that the evidence proves beyond a doubt that she committed the crime. What direct evidence has been submitted to you? Merely that Karen Andre threw a body from the penthouse. We admit that, but we deny that it was the body of Bjorn Faulkner. Now what about a motive? In business, the lives of Karen Andre and Bjorn Faulkner were one. She had no motive. Think of Bjorn Faulkner. The state contends that Mr. Faulkner had repented, that he reformed his methods and became a devoted husband, that he dedicated his life to the task of saving his unfortunate investors. Do you believe that Bjorn Faulkner was the type of man to repent and to renounce his whole life? If you do, then she's guilty. But have you listened to the testimony? Bjorn Faulkner did not take his wife into his confidences, and he failed to explain his absences from her night after night. Was this the act of a devoted husband? On the 16th of January, Mr. Faulkner absconded with $70 million. Was this the act of a man trying to save his investors? When Bjorn Faulkner realized that he could no longer postpone the collapse of his empire, he decided to stage a fake suicide. And to whom did he confide these plans? To his loving wife? No. To Karen Andre. Who was going to meet Mr. Faulkner in Buenos Aires? Again, his wife? No. Karen Andre. There was every possible advantage to Miss Andre if Bjorn Faulkner lived. She had no motive. Karen Andre loved Bjorn Faulkner. That, ladies and gentlemen, is her only defense. Is it in you to understand her? Is it in you to understand the man that she loved? Who's going to be on trial here in a few moments? Karen Andre? No. It is you, ladies and gentlemen of the jury. It is you whose very hearts will be laid bare when you render a decision. And I ask you for a verdict of not guilty. And I thank you.
And now, Mr. Flynn, you may conclude your case.
Thank you, Ron. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm not going to appeal to your hearts, but to your reason alone. I have no need to appeal to your sympathies, for the only things that concern you in this case are the facts. As I enumerate them to you, bear in mind, these are not manufactured alibis, but facts. Bjorn Faulkner was killed on the night of January the 16th. He was murdered. His body was thrown from the balcony of his penthouse by Karen Andre, and a detective from a nearby rooftop was an eyewitness to it. And that is a fact. He was already dead. He had been shot in the chest, and the recently discharged gun was found in that apartment by the police. The defense claims that he fired the gun himself in an attempted suicide. But that gun bore the fingerprints of Karen Andre and nobody else, and that is another fact. That gun was the property of Lawrence Regan, although she had sworn that she had never seen him before. According to the testimony of the housekeeper, Larry Regan was her lover, and with him she conspired to send $70 million to South America. Where did they get such a sum? By forging the name of John Graham Whitfield. And that is a fact which Karen Andre has herself admitted here on the witness stand. Now, why did they do all this? Well, a child could give you the answer. Karen Andre hated Bjorn Faulkner because he had married another woman and discharged her from his office. She was determined to accomplish two things. First, avenge herself on Faulkner, and then seize his money and thus assure for herself the depraved luxury to which she had become accustomed. This she conspired to do with her new lover, Larry Regan. And so between them, they concocted this diabolically clever alibi, this confusion of corpses, this cock and bull story, the sheer impudence of which almost carried it to success. Serial numbers, engines, skeletons in airplanes. Ladies and gentlemen, the body has been clearly identified as the body of Bjorn Faulkner by the state coroner's office. On January the 16th, Lenny O'Toole was lured from his home by Larry Regan in answer to a telephone call and was killed later that night. On January the 16th, the money was sent to South America. On January the 16th, Bjorn Faulkner was shot to death, and his body was thrown from the balcony in order to conceal the bullet wound and make identification difficult. On January the 16th, Larry Regan took the body of Lenny O'Toole to Rankin County in an airplane and then burned the plane and the body. And finally, a check taken from John Graham Whitfield days earlier was altered. The date was changed in this ridiculous attempt to implicate him in this crime. These are the facts in this case. A case so strong that I can conceive of no other verdict than the one I ask you to return. guilty of murder in the first degree.
Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, the bailiff will escort you from the courtroom. I shall ask you to consider your verdict carefully, omitting all personal prejudices and sympathies. I shall ask you to adhere strictly to the evidence. You are to determine only whether Karen Andre is guilty of the murder of Bjorn Faulkner. I ask you to bring the verdict of either acquittal or murder in the first degree. Will you please rise? Bailiff, will you escort the jury from the room? Please settle down, settle down. The defendant will rise and face the jury. The jury will rise and face the defendant. Mr. Foreman, have you reached a verdict?
We have, Your Honor.
What say you?
Find the defendant not guilty.
Your Honor, we ask that the defendant be discharged.
The defendant is discharged. As for the jury, I see no reason to thank this jury for a verdict which, in my opinion, is contrary to the evidence. I rule that your names be stricken from the jury rolls for the next 5 years.